Hello, ninth graders. This is the lesson for Monday morning, March 23rd. If you are in the regular ninth grade class, please don't forget that this week you will be submitting your word posters to Turnitin. You have to log in to Turnitin. You'll see where to submit it. So please make sure you follow those directions. If you're advanced, don't forget about MemBean and that you have a lesson that you have to complete tomorrow, which is already on the portal, and you have to submit that to Turnitin. So everybody should have already logged into Common Lit to complete the fifth poem, The Raven, by Edgar Allan Poe, which we're doing today, which is a nice long one, but it's a fun one too. So let's get started. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." All right, so let's stop right there for just a second and talk about what's going on so far, okay? So I want to make sure you're picturing what's going on. So this is, of course, a long time ago. I picture him being in a library. He said, in a house. He's in a house, but I picture him being in the library of his house. There's a clue coming up later that draws me to that. But also the fact that he's sitting up late reading, and he hears this tapping at his chamber door. So chamber, of course, meaning the room. So just imagine that you're by yourself, really late, midnight, reading, and suddenly you hear a knock on your bedroom door. Not your front door, your bedroom door. Now that would freak you out, right? Because you're supposed to be there alone. So that's what's going on here. It's midnight, it's dreary, he's tired, but he's sitting up reading. It's a volume of forgotten lore, which could imply a number of things. Could imply almost like a witchcraft kind of thing. And he's almost falling asleep when he hears something that sounds like somebody knocking on his door, on the door to the room that he's in. And he tries to tell himself, you know how when you wake up in the middle of the night because you hear something scary or you see something, and you try to tell yourself, oh, it's nothing. That's just my coat I left on the chair, or that's just the branches of a tree scraping the house. You try to explain it away. And so that's what he tries to do. He said it's just a visitor, that's all. Of course, it's freaky that a visitor's inside your house, dude, but okay. So he says he remembers it was in December, and he was eagerly wishing the morrow. He is full of sorrow for the lost Lenore, so we can assume that's his love. Maybe, his wife, his girlfriend, we're not sure, but she is now dead. And he is so full of sorrow that he is wishing it was tomorrow. So you know how sometimes the night seems more bleak and full of sorrow and terror and all of that, and you just know things are going to look better in the morning? And so he's wishing that morning would hurry up and get there. That whole evening, every time there was a rustling of the purple curtain, so I picture those big velvet, purple curtains hanging at this I picture him being in a library, and in a house. You know what I mean? Like the ones that have the shelves going all the way up, and like maybe even the thing that you can move around the edge to get to the books up high, and like 2 chairs in front of the fireplace. You know, I picture that kind of thing. And so already all night, every time the curtains rustle, he's been filled with fantastic terrors. So he's already in this sort of heightened, creeped out sense when he hears this knocking on his chamber door. So finally he grows brave enough that he calls out, you know, "Sir, madam, I'm sorry, I was almost asleep, I wasn't sure I heard you." And so he's walking over the door while he's saying that, and when he opens the door and looks out in the hallway, there's nothing. It's just darkness. So I don't know what's scarier, you know, seeing something there or seeing nothing there. And then you're like, well, then what did I just hear? Okay, so that's where we pick back up. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore?" This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." All right, so whenever he peers out into the hallway and he says he's dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before, you get a clue for what that must have been, because then right after that he whispers into the hallway, "Lenore?" So you almost get the sense that, you know, this love of his that he is in sorrow over, who has passed away, he's thinking, is it her ghost? Is that why there has been, you know, every time the curtains rustled, he got kind of scared? You know, is he thinking her ghost might be coming back to make a late night visit upon him? So when he whispers out Lenore, all he hears is an echo that says Lenore, which is equally creepy. So he goes back into the room and he hears a tapping again. And this one's even louder. And so he's thinking, okay, that sounds like it's at the window. So he's like, let me go figure out what's going on, see what this mystery is. And again, he's still trying to explain it away to himself. It's just the wind. It's just the wind. He's trying to calm himself down. So, you know, I think we've all been in that situation where, you know, you're kind of terrified, but the logical side of your mind is trying to like calm you down, you know, like, calm down, it's just the wind. It's something that's a logical explanation. Okay? So moving to the next page. Whoops. I think I missed a part of it. Oh, no, here it is. Okay. "Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. Perched, and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. Okay, so he goes over to the window and opens the shutter, and all of a sudden a raven steps in. And he doesn't, you know, ask permission, doesn't stop. He just suddenly goes, I guess, you know, assume flies over to above his chamber door and perches on a bust of Pallas, okay, which is part of the word for, it's Pallas Athena, so he actually perches on a bust of Athena, goddess of wisdom, okay? Now, when we talk about a bust, you know what that is, right? It's a sculpture, but it's just the shoulders and the head. So you've seen one before because there's a bust of Mr. Ussery right when you come into the school. You know what I'm talking about? It's right over there. It's in bronze. And so that's again why I picture this being in a library in this old house, because that was a very common thing that they would have. You know, you would see like a bust of Beethoven on the piano, or a bust of Shakespeare or something like that. So, so over the door, so there must be shelves over the door. Again, I picture this being a library and just shelves all the way up to the ceiling. There's a shelf over the door, and that's where the bust of Pallas Athena is. And so that's where the raven goes, and it flies over there and just perches there and sits and nothing more. So it makes him smile, you know. I mean, it's so unusual. You don't expect for, if you open the window, a bird to fly in and then just to go perch on this statue like it lives there and this is its, you know, its home. And it's so grave looking. So he greets him and says, you know, basically, tell me, ancient raven, what is your name? And the raven actually answers him. The raven says, nevermore. So, and, you know, it's not out of the realm of possibility that birds can speak. We know there's multiple birds that can learn to speak, like parrots and stuff like that. So he thinks, well, this is weird. And so that's why he marvels to hear this raven speak so plainly, because it was very easy to tell that that's what he was saying. He says, but its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. That's important. He had asked it what its name is, and the raven said, nevermore. Those two things don't match. So he realizes here, at this point in the poem, that the raven is not truly responding to him. But he thinks it's a weird circumstance, because, you know, it's not normal for a living human being to see a bird above his chamber door with a name like nevermore. Okay, we'll pick back up. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. So the raven's sitting there and just doesn't say anything else. And so after a while, staring at him, our speaker of the poem mutters under his breath, I'm sure he'll leave too. All my other friends have left. So we don't know, is he talking just about Lenore having died, or have his other friends deserted him in his time of sorrow as well? So he's being pretty pessimistic and just saying, well, this raven's probably going to leave me just like everything else has. But the raven suddenly says, again, nevermore, which this time kind of makes a little more sense in context to what he just said. Because he said he'll probably leave me too, and the raven saying nevermore makes it sound like he's saying, no, I'm never going to leave. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore of never, nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. So he thinks to himself, well, doubtless that's probably the only word it knows. That's its only stock and store. It probably had some kind of unhappy master who, you know, that's the only word he learned, was just nevermore. But nevertheless, he smiles at it and he's intrigued by it. So he wheels a chair over and sets it in front of the door so that he's sitting, you know, looking up at the bird on top of the bust of Pallas Athena above his chamber door, and sits there thinking, what does it mean? You know, and he leans back on the velvet of the chair. What can this mean? Why does this bird suddenly flown in and is saying nevermore. Okay? Next page. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, respite and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, O quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay, so he's sitting there wondering, like, what kind of creature is this? Why would he suddenly be here? And it seems to him that the bird's eyes start burning into his heart. And as he leans back on the cushion, the velvet of the cushion of the chair, he says that suddenly he thinks about her and thinks she shall press her head against that cushion nevermore. So I almost wonder if, sometimes when you sit in a chair and like lean back against it, if it's somebody's chair where they always sit in, you can kind of get the smell of them or whatever. I wonder if that was her chair. And so when he leans back and presses against it, he gets, a whiff of her and brings back up that memory of her. So suddenly it seems like the air grows really dense, like it's perfumed from an unseen censer, which is, if you've ever been to a Catholic or Episcopalian church, whenever, like on Holy Sundays and stuff like that, whenever they swing, it's basically like a metal ball with incense, okay? And so he says it seems like that. He gets this smell. And he calls out to the bird that he's a wretch, and he says, if God has sent you, has he sent you with some kind of respite from the memories of Lenore or Nepenthe that he could drink, quaff means drink, to forget her? So has he sent you with some kind of drink, some kind of drug that I can take in order to forget Lenore? Because he's miserable because he misses her. And the raven says nevermore. So, no, he doesn't have anything for him, and it's kind of implying, you're never going to forget her. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore. Desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore, quoth the raven, nevermore. Okay, so what he asks there is, he says he doesn't know whether this bird is a prophet and sent, possibly from heaven, or is it a thing of evil sent by the tempter, and with tempter in all caps like that, that's of course referencing Satan. And so he doesn't know how the bird has landed, but he asks him the question, is there balm in Gilead, which basically just means, is there some kind of way to stop this pain that he's feeling? Is there eventually going to be something that will heal him from the pain of his sorrow and grief over his lost Lenore? And of course the raven says nevermore, which again implies that no, you're always going to grieve for her. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore. Tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. So what he asks then is, he says, by heaven, please tell me at least once I get to heaven, will I be able to see her again? Will I once again clasp or hug a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore? So basically he's saying, okay, if I'm going to be miserable my whole life, if there is no balm or anything that will help me forget my sorrow for her, can I at least look forward to heaven where I will see her again and be able to hug her and, be reunited with her in the afterlife. And of course the raven says, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. So, what do we have here in this final stanza? What's happened? He says that the raven still is sitting. Okay? Go back to that first stanza. Once upon a midnight dreary. Okay? And then he says in the next one, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December. So that begs the question, how long has that raven been sitting there? It sounds like months. And so the whole time, now he is trapped. Remember how he pulled the chair over and was in the shadow of the raven as the raven sat on top of the bust of Athena? And now his eyes are like a demon's that is like holding him in place. He's fixed. He's transfixed. He can't move. And his soul can't seem to get out from under that shadow. He's still sitting there. And his soul can be lifted nevermore. So, basically what we've seen then is his descent into madness. You know, he has gone insane. But why? And if you look back at the beginning, you know, when he first sees, well, not that far back, but when he first sees the raven, he thinks that, you know, and asks him what his name is, and he says nevermore. He's like, oh, yeah, haha, that's funny. You know, he's saying nevermore. That doesn't make sense. But he keeps asking these questions that make him more and more upset, knowing what the answer is going to be. The raven only says one word. He says nevermore. But so he drives himself insane with those answers. Because, you know, if he just framed the question differently, like, you know, oh, am I going to be miserable forever? And the raven's like, nevermore. Oh, good. Maybe I'll feel better tomorrow. You know, but no, that's not what he does. He frames the questions in such a way that he knows he's going to get the answer nevermore, and it's going to plunge him deeper and deeper into this despair until literally we can assume that he winds up in a state of insanity. And I think it's really interesting. Poe is incredible, as we know. We've talked about him before with Cask of Amontillado. But I think the way that he uses the literary elements in this poem is absolutely magnificent, because it almost sounds like you're weaving a spell throughout there. So you have, you know, you've got the refrain, of course, of nevermore that's repeated again and again and again. That repetition is just, you know, part of what's driving him insane. But the repetition really kind of weaves a spell around us, as well as there's a very steady meter, and then there's also a very steady rhyme to include internal rhyme. Okay? So let's take a look at that, all right? So, let's see, which color will do green? Okay, so just looking at, you know, of any particular one of the stanzas, we'll do the top of one on this page. You've got expressing, so we'll do the ing there as an A. Core, of course, would be B. Reclining as an A. Or B, more B. And so then you see that repeated throughout a lot of them, okay? And in addition to that, though, so you have this very, you've got this repetition of the rhyme scheme, you also have the internal rhyme. Okay, so you've got like guessing, expressing. Come on. And then it's not in that second one that ends in B, but then divining, reclining, okay? And then you see that throughout here too. So like denser, censor, the and the, continuing on, So there's that pattern that keeps going. So having that much rhyme, you've got the rhyme scheme going at the end rhyme, which is at the end of the line, which is what we're used to, but also the internal rhyme really kind of feels almost like an incantation, almost like it's weaving this spell about us as we listen. And so I think that sort of lends itself even more to the very creepy atmosphere and this sense of almost descending into madness along with the speaker. So, in addition to both of those, you also have, I think, quite vivid imagery, wouldn't you say? You can really see, the raven. You can see him staring into the blackness. This would be a cool poem, and somebody's probably done it. But this would be a cool poem to actually illustrate. To do like a series of drawings for, or almost like a graphic novel, but just for the poem, And again, somebody's probably already done that, but because the imagery is so strong, you can really picture so much of what's happening there. And this is, of course, an example of narrative poetry, right? Remember what that is? Narrative poetry is where it tells a story, and this definitely does tell an entire story. So there's a lot going on in this poem. Part of it is because it's so long, but part of it's because Poe's just the master. So hopefully that helped you a little bit with the understanding and appreciation of it. It's always a fun poem to study and a fun poem to read. I hate we're not all together to do that. Don't forget to fill out your poetry analysis sheet. Remember, you're not sending those in. We'll deal with those later when we get back, or we'll figure something else out. And keep reading your AR, and stay safe and stay inside. I miss y'all.